Alright, this video is going to help you understand the 6 inverse trig functions and how to do worksheet 6.1 and 6.2. Last week on Tuesday we discussed that cosine inverse had a domain between -1 and +1 and a range between 0 and pi. So when we're doing cosine inverse functions, all my answers that I'm looking for on my circle are going to end up being in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 only. When we discussed sine inverse and tangent inverse, the domain was between -1 and +1 for sine, and the range was between -pi/2 and +pi/2. For tangent, the domain was going to go from -infinity to +infinity, but the range was also going to be between -pi/2 and +pi/2. So anytime we're answering questions for sine inverse and tangent inverse, we're looking at quadrants 1 and 4. And if I get an answer in quadrant 4, I'm going to name these angles as negative radians. So this would be a -pi/6, -pi/4, -pi/3, and -pi/2. My reciprocal inverse functions. For secant, my reciprocal inverse is going to be in quadrants 1 and 2, excluding pi/2. For cosecant, I'm going to be looking in quadrants 1 and 4, but excluding 0. For cotangent, I'm going to look in quadrants 1 and 2, but I'm going to exclude the 0 and the pi. So when I'm working worksheet 6.1, I'm looking for where on the circle for sine inverse does the y value equal 0. And because it said sine inverse, I can only look between -pi/2 and +pi/2, which means I'm only looking in quadrants 1 and 4. Sine is 0 right here at 0 radians, so my answer is 0. Cosine inverse of 1. Because it says cosine inverse, I can only look between 0 and pi, which means I'm only looking in quadrants 1 and 2. And they want to know, where does cosine, which is x, equal 1? Well, cosine, which is x, equals 1 right here at 0 radians. We have 0 again. Tangent inverse, again, we're looking in quadrants 1 and 4, and we're looking between -pi/2 and +pi/2. And I want to know where on the circle in quadrants 1 and 4 does tangent equal 0. Tangent equals 0 right there at 0 radians. So the first 3 answers all happen to be 0. That's just a coincidence. Let's go look at 19. On 19, again, sine inverse, I go look at quadrants 1 and 4. Because that's a positive sign, I'm going to focus my attention in quadrant 1. Now I want to know where in quadrant 1 does sine, which is y, equal √2/2. That happens right here in the middle at pi/4. Tangent inverse. We're looking in quadrants 1 and 4. Because it's a positive tangent, I'm going to focus in quadrant 1. My tangents in quadrant 1 at pi/6, I'm √3/3. That's not what I want. At pi/4, my tangent is 1. That's not what I want. At pi/3, tangent is √3. That's what I'm looking for. So it's at pi/3. This next one says cosine inverse. So we're looking in quadrants 1 and 2. Cosine is x. That's a -√3/2. So I'm going to focus in quadrant 2. I'm going to go around my circle and I'm trying to figure out, where does x equal -√3/2. Well, right here at the top at 2pi/3, x is -1/2, so that's not it. At 3pi/4, x is equal to -√2/2, so that's not it. At 5pi/6, x is equal to -√3/2. So my answer is 5pi/6. These next 4 all have to do with some properties that we talked about. And we wrote them, or some of us did, we wrote them right here on the middle of our paper, and I'm just going to keep referring back to them. So number 37 says sine inverse of 0.54. So I'm going to go look at the sine properties that we wrote down. And I'm going to find the one that says sine inverse, which is this top one. Sine inverse of x will equal x if this number right here inside is between -1 and +1. Well, 0.54 is between -1 and +1, so my answer is going to actually be 0.54. Okay. The next one says cosine inverse cosine of 4 pi over 5. So I'm going to go find my cosine rules. So here's my cosine rule. And it says cosine inverse. I'm sorry. And then it says cosine inverse cosine. This has the inverse first. I'm going to use the second rule. And it says whatever's inside is going to be the answer if it's between 0 and pi. Well, 4 pi over 5 is between 0 and pi. So my answer is 4 pi over 5. Done. Number 41 is a tangent problem. I'm going to go find my tangent rules. They're right here. And it says tan inverse. So I'm looking at this first rule. And it says it's going to be x if x is a real number. Well, it's a real number unless it has an I for imaginary. So -3.5 is real. So my answer is -3.5. I'm going to go back to my sine rule. It says sine inverse sine. So I'm looking at the second rule. And it said the answer will be x if this number in here is between -pi over 2 and pi over 2. So 3 pi over 7 is between -pi over 2 and pi over 2. So my answer will be -3 pi over 7. On 45 through 55, we talked about learning how to do them in our calculators, and so that's what I'm going to focus on right here. You'll notice that all of these problems have a pi in it in one part or another. So we're going to go change our mode to radian mode. So you go to mode and make sure radian is highlighted. A lot of times that's where your calculator already starts, but just double check it. I'm going to go type in what it says. I'm going to go type in second sine. Actually, I forgot the second bit. Let me try this again. I'm going to type in second sine. Oh, there we go. And then it says sine of pi over 6. And I'm going to hit enter, and I get the decimal 0.523 blah, blah, blah. And they want to know, does that equal pi over 6? So now I'm going to go type in the pi over 6. I'm going to type in pi divided by 6. So it looks like the left side that I entered in the calculator and the right side that I entered in the calculator are exactly the same. So it says answer each with a yes or no. Yes, that matched. Oh wait, you know what? I didn't type it in right. Nobody caught me. This should have been a negative here, so now I got to check it again. Okay, so second sine negative pi over 6. Let's try it again. Equals negative 0.52 blah, blah, blah. Now I'm going to type in positive pi over 6. And actually, no, now I have to change my answer. No, they're not equal. That negative is what made them not equal. Okay, now I'm going to do the next one. I'm going to type in sine, and then sine inverse, so second sine, 2, and I get an error. The reason we get an error is because I don't fall between -1 and +1. So the answer is no. And the reason is why, because I didn't fall between -1 and +1. Does cosine inverse cosine negative pi over 6 equal negative pi over 6? I don't know. Let's go check it. So we're going to go type in cosine inverse cosine negative pi divided by 6. Oops. Let me try that again. So cosine, second cosine, cosine, negative pi divided by 6. That's my first one. And then I'm going to type in negative pi divided by 6. And no, they don't equal each other again. The top one's positive, the bottom one's negative. So again, they're not equal. Let's go check the bottom three. We're just practicing typing them in the calculator. So I have cosine, second cosine, negative 1/2. My answer is negative 0.5. Then I'm going to go type in the right hand side, negative 1/2 is negative 0.5. So that one is a yes. We're going to do the tangent. It says second tan, and then it says tangent negative pi divided by 3. And I got negative 1.047. Now I'm going to type in the right side, negative pi divided by 3. I got the same negative decimal, so this is also a yes. One more. We're going to go do tangent second tan of 2. I get 2, and with the right hand side, it also says 2. Alright, so it was no, 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 yes, yes, yes. So we're just practicing typing them in the calculator. Alright, so that's worksheet 6.1. Worksheet 6.2 is on the opposite side. I'm just going to do a few from each section to make sure you understand how to do them. So when you're doing side 6.2, you're going to do the inside first, and once you get your inside answer, then you're going to do the outside. Alright, so let's look at number 9. On number 9, it says sine inverse root 2 over 2. Because it says sine inverse, I'm only thinking about quadrants 1 and 4. And they want to know where in quadrant 1 and 4 does sine, which is my y, equal root 2 over 2. What happens right here at pi over 4. So I'm going to take this answer, pi over 4, and I'm going to cosine it. So I'm going to write cosine pi over 4. So the inside gave me pi over 4. Now I'm going to do the outside. The outside says take cosine of pi over 4. Well, right here at pi over 4, what is the x value? Because that's my cosine. It's root 2 over 2. Number 13 says cosine inverse. So now I'm thinking quadrants 1 and 2. So where in quadrant 1 and 2 does cosine, which is x, equal 1/2? Cosine equals 1/2 up here at pi over 3. So I'm going to take that answer, pi over 3, and I'm going to go do the outside to it. So it says at pi over 3 that I'm going to go do secant. Secant is the reciprocal to cosine. So all I'm going to do is take my cosine. All I'm going to do is take my cosine, which is my x, and I'm going to flip it. So at pi over 3, x is equal to 1/2. But I don't want cosine, I want secant. So I'm going to take this 1/2 and I'm going to flip it, and we get 2. Number 17, tangent inverse. So I'm looking in quadrants 1 and 4. And they want to know where in 1 and 4 does tangent equal -1. Well, tangent equals +1 at pi over 4. So it would make sense that it equals -1 at negative pi over 4. So my answer to the inside is negative pi over 4. And now they want me to go to negative pi over 4 on my circle, which is right here in quadrant 4. And they want me to write down the sine value, which is y. So down here at negative pi over 4, the y value is negative root 2 over 2. Okay? 21. Cosine 5 pi over 4. Now this time it doesn't say inverse, it says cosine, which means I can go anywhere I want on the circle. And 5 pi over 4 happens to be down here in quadrant 3. And they want to know what is cosine at 5 pi over 4. Well, cosine at 5 pi over 4 is negative root 2 over 2. So that's the answer to the inside. So now I'm going to go do the outside. The outside says to take cosine inverse of negative root 2 over 2. Because I said inverse, I'm now looking at quadrants 1 and 2 only. Because it says cosine, I'm looking for my x's that are negative. So I'm looking over here in quadrant 2. And my x is negative root 2 over 2 at 3 pi over 4. 25. Sine inverse means I'm going to go look at quadrants 1 and 4. I'm looking for a y value that's 1/3. So as I look at my y values in quadrant 1, none of them say 1/3. When this happens, we're going to change this into an x, y, r problem, meaning it's not on the circle. Sign is always y over r, so my y is 1, my r is 3. To find x, I'm going to use my formula, x squared plus y squared equals r squared. So x squared equals 8. X equals the square root of 8, which simplifies to 2 square roots of 2. We've done that a couple times. Here's a quick recap. 2 is prime, 4 is not. Couples go out, singles stay home. Alright, so now that I have my x, my y, and my r, I can find tangent. Tangent is the trig ratio of y over r. So I have, y over x, so I'm going to have 1 over 2 square roots of 2. I'm going to fix my trashy math, that's what Miss L calls it, and we get root 2 over 4. Number 29. On number 29, it says sine inverse. So again, I'm looking in quadrants 1 and 4 only. I'm looking for root 2 over 3 to be in quadrant 1 or in quadrant 4. Because it's a negative, I'm looking for it to be over here. Is that a negative? No, it's not. It's a positive. I'm looking in quadrant 1. It's not on my circle again. So because it's not on my circle, it's an x, y, r problem. It's sine, so I know y is root 2, r is 3, x squared plus y squared equals r squared. X squared equals 7, so x is the square root of 7. Okay, they want me to find cotangent. Cotangent means x over y. I'm going to fix my trashy math, and we get square root of 14 over 2. Number 33. Sine inverse, again, I'm thinking quadrants 1 and 4. It's positive. I'm trying to find 2 root 5 over 5 on my circle. It's not there. So again, guys, we got an x, y, and the r problem. Because it's sine, I know that I have 2 root 5 for y. My r is 5. So x squared plus y squared equals r squared. X squared equals 5. So x is the square root of 5. They asked me for secant. So secant is the reciprocal to cosine. So I'm going to have the r over the x. I'm going to go fix my bad math manners. My 5's cancel. My answer is going to be the square root of 5. Number 37, we're talking about cotangent inverse. So I'm looking in quadrants 1 and 2. I know that cotangent is the reciprocal to tangent, and I know that tangent is root 3 over 3 at pi over 6, and if I flip root 3 over 3, I get 3 over root 3. I fix my bad math manners, and I end up with the square root of 3, which happened at pi over 6. Last one I'm going to do with you, and then y'all can do the right-hand side. Number 41 says secant. So secant is the reciprocal to cosine, so I'm thinking about being in here. And they want me to find 2 root 3 over 3, which is positive. So my choices are, I'm either going to flip. My first choice right here is square root of 3 over 2, so I'm going to flip that and see if that works. So square root of 3 over 2, I'm going to flip it, and it's 2 over square root of 3. I'm going to fix my bad math manners. Hey, that's actually the one that worked. So it's pi over 6. Okay, so I did the whole left-hand side. I think you can probably go do the right-hand side. I hope this helps. Bring questions if you have into tutoring.